From 2022, the UK will introduce full border controls. Time we provided tips, tricks, and just how to go about it. Let's go. Hello, I'm just here at the top corner. Welcome to the Countdown to 2022. I'm excited to present you a daily series of customs and global trade changes with the UK as full border controls are being introduced in 2022. So every day we're going to look at a different aspect of the changes. Great, right? So today we're going to look at a step-by-step guide on how to do imports into GB from the EU. Well, EU 26. And we're going to be using the transit procedure. Makes it a bit more complicated, but it's a common way to move goods to GB. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the top tips that we can provide for making full customs declarations. That is, if you are using an agent, such as us, as customs manager, what we as your agent would want you to provide us. Or if you're doing it yourself, well, then these are the things that you simply need to have and give us, right? And that makes sure that the customs declaration can be lodged on time. On the 29th, it's time for a step-by-step export guide. So the same as for imports, but reverse. So out of GB into EU, quite frankly, that really doesn't change. So, but for completion's sake, we might as well, just to be fair, right? On the 30th, we're going to do a POW pre-notification session. We're going to talk about IPAFFS. We're also going to mention postponed VAT accounting, because a lot of people had questions on that, how that's going to impact everything. And then, of course, we must talk about the rules of origin, because there are also important changes coming up. And then on the 31st, how about a final checklist? So you can just make sure you are set for the changes coming up. So that's the plan. I hope you like it. Right, so today we're going to talk about a step-by-step guide for imports from the EU to GB using the transit procedure. Now, I should say that there is a difference in procedure, not fundamentally, but there is an added flexibility if you're moving goods from Irish ports. So from Ireland, that be Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland, there you have the alternative of using delayed declaration, the simplification, facilitation that was available to businesses from the EU in 2021 that is now being stopped for EU 26. So every EU member state except Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and Northern Ireland, where businesses can still use delayed declarations. Well, look, if in a step-by-step guide, I think I've got 7 steps that need to happen in order to move goods using transit under this procedure and to get it to GB. So here's how. Obviously, there needs to be groundwork. There needs to be a preparation that I think everybody has completed by now. If you're moving, say, for example, from France to Great Britain, we have POW goods, right? So make it really complicated. POW goods are products of animal origin. Then obviously you need EORI numbers. Everybody understood that now. So we need a GB EORI number for the importer or consignee, and a French EORI number if we're going from France, or an EU EORI number for the exporter or consignor. Now, if you're using transit, it is very useful, although not mandatory, to also think about obtaining authorized consignee and authorized consignor status. Now, that allows the French exporter, being the consignor, authorized consignor, to start the transit movement at their own premises rather than checking in with French customs at a very specific inland border facility or customs office. And equally, when the goods arrive in GB, you would need to check in with the inland border facility or the customs house in Great Britain in order to discharge the transit movement. Because it's a special procedure, if you don't have that authorization, you would need to detour the truck via the customs house to start it and via the customs house to stop it. So being authorized consignee, consignor takes a while, so you need to think about that carefully. You also will need a transit guarantee, and that's money in some shape or form blocked in a bank account or whatever is acceptable to the French and the GB authorities. in order to receive or move goods under transit, because you're suspending the duty and you're moving goods around the EU and the UK where duty has not been paid. So in order to protect that money, there's a transit guarantee that needs to be put in place that can be reduced under certain circumstances. So you've got the overall preparation done. Now the goods specific preparation starts. I would say I'd call that a step 2. And here, obviously, we need a contract between buyer and seller. That's the first step. And I can only stress from 1 year of Brexit experience, take a moment to pause and discuss the Incoterms between buyer and seller. Is it DDP? Is it DAP? Is it Ex-Works? Is it FCA? Whatever it is, you've got to make sure that importer and exporter and freight agent understand the same thing as you as regards to Incoterms. It is very important, because otherwise there might be errors en route. Okay, so make sure you clarify the Incoterms in contract, and you secondly make sure everybody understands what that means. Yes, because there is various interpretation of what DEP is, for example, when there's only one real definition in the ICC book. If you don't know what I mean, then check out our Incoterm training, which you can study anytime, anywhere, online. That'll explain everything. Up next, the POWOW fundamentals. Now, you've got to understand that products of animal origin are treated differently than other standard products like electronics or textiles or the likes of it. POWOW products could pose a biosecurity threat. So they need to be dealt with in a different way. And one way to do that is by a pre-notification system called IPAFFS. That is a complicated term for saying you need to pre-notify any products of animal origin. And this could be, your beef. That could be your lasagna as well, a composite product which contains quite a lot of beef. Or it could be your cheese, or it could be your milk, right? Depending on the product and how much animal or origin product it contains. Anyway, needs to go into IPAFFS, so you need an account with IPAFFS. Have you got it? Well, if you haven't, get it. And then you need to do a rules of origin check. Okay, so rules of origin help you to save customs duty. So if you can prove that the goods are from France and you have a certificate, maybe a supplier declaration, that allows this statement to be true, then you can make this statement on a piece of paper called Statement of Origin, which then allows the importer to claim preferential duties. So that check also needs to happen probably at the state. So now we check the product, right? There are other checks you can do like commodity code determination and so on, but let's move on. So the third thing I would do is I would look at the movement specific preparations that I now need to do. And this is where it gets, as you can see, quite a bit complicated. But in a logical way, what would you do? Well, first of all, now you've got the IPAFFS account, you need to lodge before goods move, I would recommend, the IPAFFS pre-notification, because that has, I think, a 24-hour pre-notification deadline. So it needs to happen early enough. There is a 15 parts of this application that you need to do, or this pre-notification that you need to do. 15 times you need to click, and we've made a video on it, so I'll put the link in the description down below, so you can check that out in more detail. You'd also need to start, and that is new for 2022, as is the IPAFFS notification, you'd need to do a pre-lodgement of the import declaration. So pre-lodgement and pre-lodgement. And that is important because you can't start lodging the declaration when it arrives in Dover because there's no space. Otherwise, you couldn't move the goods. So that needs to be completed before the goods actually move into GB. So with your best guesstimate as to when the goods arrive. And there will be a second session tomorrow on the top tips for making an import declaration. So when you do that at GB side, so this is something that your customs agent will do for you, or you do yourself. So if you hire us to do it, we would pre-lodge the import declaration for you. That will generate an import MRN. MRN is a movement reference number, and that is what you need in order to import the goods. Now, while GB is doing that, France has to do a lot of things as well. So if we are in past July and the export health certificates or veterinary certificates are mandatory, then France, and I repeat, it is a French thing, it's an exporter thing to do, with the French VAT, according to French procedures, needs to complete the export health certificate provided by UK authorities, because it is an import certificate that needs to be completed as the British wanted by the French and by the French VAT. So this is quite complicated. You've got to think about it. You've got to learn how that works. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. Don't think you can just fill it out and that's it. Needs some preparation. Okay, but we will have more we'll have a lot of guidance on the export blog on this. You know, we have an expert blog which tells you everything you need to know. France, the French side, also has to do an export declaration, and that they can do in the French system. So in France, that could be Delta G, for example, and that generates an EAD, and that's an export accompanying document. And as the name suggests, that should go with the goods. With the export accompanying document, you also will get an export MRN, and that you will use to create the transit declaration. So after you exported the goods, you now need to move them into the next procedure, which is the transit procedure on the French side. So you will then fill out that form, and that will be completed, and then that generates a TAD, which is a transit accompanying document. So this then needs to accompany the goods rather than the EAD, because we have moved from export into transit. So we now have a transit accompanying document, and we have a transit MRN, and that you have to, or the French have to lodge in a specific system called the NCTS system, the new computerized transit system. And what's unique about this system is that this one is connected to the UK because we are part of the Common Transit Convention. So France is, the UK is, but we're not connected. So the UK is not connected to Delta G, for example, as the French are not connected to the import system of the UK. So with that transit declaration, you then have everything you need in order to complete the pre-notification. So you've already lodged the pre-notification import declaration, but now we need to deal with the full border controls. So the border controls need to happen at Dover, but electronically and not physically. So how does that work? Well, we use a system called GVMS, and there is an online training. It takes about 3 hours to complete. I recommend you take it on customsmanager.org. GVMS requires you to register again, and then you need to generate a GMR, and that's the Good Movement Reference number, and that is the number you need in order to get onto the ferry. So you can't get onto the ferry if you don't have a GMR. You can only get the GMR if you have a transit MRN, and you add the vehicle details, so the vehicle registration number plate, and you add the crossing details, and then you click generate, and that then links everything together and creates one number, and that number, or one barcode, and that number then has all this information as to what goods move on what vehicle on what service. Yes, and that allows control. So once you've got the GMR, you are then ready to go. The driver can then, or the haulier company can then load the goods. You will then give the driver, or the haulier company will give the driver the TAD, the transit accompanying document, and that has the MRN, and that will then be given to the carrier, so the ferry. So there'll be, when you check in, you scan, and that will automatically then pass the CAD MRN details onto the carrier. And you also have the GMR then. The GMR contains all of the necessary information, and if you are watching this post entry of the EHC's requirements, then you would also need an EHC. And of course, obviously, the registration, the vehicle registration, would also be scanned upon boarding, and that will then allow the customs information, or the carrier, to pass the information that the vehicle has boarded the ferry and is now on the ferry to HMRC. So the information from the GVMS and the GMR and the VRN all together is then passed on as the truck is crossing the channel. But what happens with this area automated number plate recognition service or system that then communicates to the authorities in Great Britain, and then Great Britain with all the information of the GMR and therefore the MRN and therefore the details of the goods can then decide whether this needs to be checked. If they say so, that will be communicated through GBMS, and then a border inland facility would need to be visited in order to have either the paperwork checked or a physical inspection may also take place. On the transit side, we also need a bit of work, but that's done automatically. So every time we cross an office of transit, we would need to have that recognized. So normally what would happen is the driver would present the TAD at the customs checkpoint. There is no customs checkpoint in Dover, so the GVMS system will electronically, during the crossing, carry out the function of Office of Transit. The driver then arrives in Dover and with no checks indicated can move on to the authorized consignee's premises to complete the transit movement. When the arrival happens, then the consignee's premises can then complete the transit movement, and then the customs agent can check in NCTS and see that the Office of Transit function has been completed, and then they can discharge the transit by releasing the PUAO product into free circulation, and then HMRC is notified that the goods have arrived, and therefore the relevant duties and import VAT will become due. Right, so in these steps that we have now completed, we now know the step-by-step guide on how to move goods into Great Britain from the 1st of January 2022. So I hope this was useful. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you tomorrow if you like. Thanks. Bye.